Hi, and welcome back. This is Second Rate Film School. I'm Andrew Wass, and I have a very special guest star here today. Welcome, Ben Rock.
Howdy, neighbor. How's it going?
Very good. Yeah, very good. Found out we live very close nearby, so we're still quarantining. We're not going to be
Yeah,
near any each other, so but we
yeah. We're
could.
on Zoom, but I could almost just lean out my window and scream really loud, and you might be able to pick some of it up.
Yeah, probably. So, yeah, just to fill people in who might not who know your involvement, you were the production designer on the Blair Witch Project. Then you were involved with writing, producing, and directing some of the mockumentaries that came out for the first one, and then the
Mm.
sequel, as we'll get into. And then you've gone on to have a pretty successful career on your own. You just had Video Palace on Shutter. The book version just came out, if I'm correct.
Yeah, just dropped this week.
So
Very
um,
excited about the Video Palace book,
I'll put a link below for people to check that out.
and
So
you could get a third Blair Witch score if you asked Mike Manello to come on because he would love to talk about that. And the Video Palace book is pure Manello.
there we go. Yeah, I'm slowly turning into a Blair Witch Project channel. This was never like the actual intention, but hey, you know what? I'll just keep getting people on. We'll get Dan Karcher on eventually. Uh, so, well, either way, you're the second one. So you're still pretty top tier. You know, it's not getting old for the fan base yet. So again, yeah, thank you for doing this, and
Of course.
let's jump on in. So being the production designer on this movie had to be interesting. So like, what was it like for the most part? Like, how hands on were you from like day to day?
There was virtually no crew. I did have an art director that was part of my crew, Rick Moreno, and I don't even know what his official title was, but Fahad Vania, who came out and helped us build all the stickmen, and Ed's wife Steph, Ed's wife Steph's sister Carolyn, Dan's wife Julia, Greg. That's about it. I mean, and Tony Cora, actually, who's Ed's cousin. Um, and actually, two of Ed's friends, Lonnie, and I'm blanking on the other person's name. He's gonna beat me up, but it's been a long time. Anyway, yeah, I mean the crew is tiny. I remember there was a movie that I'd worked on that I guarantee you've never seen. Just maybe 6-8 months before we made Blair Witch. It was called The Pack, and it was actually it's probably over a year before I made Blair Witch, but which stands for Prefabricated Animalistic Cybernetic Killer. And I was a makeup effects artist before I worked on Blair Witch, and I made the monster for that movie. And I remember the first day asking somebody like, "Hey, do we have any PAs?" And Kristen Bixler, who was the production designer, said, "Yeah, they're all called department heads." And that was definitely Blair Witch, where it's like, you need something done, just go do it. Because the real core team, like, we were there prepping for a month. And so, like, Rick Moreno was there to be the art director, but he, like, I think he had a job or something. Like, there were only a handful of us who, like, our full-time job was just making this movie. And that would have been Ed, Dan, Greg, Neil Fredericks, and me, really. That would have been the whole team.
Obviously, it was very guerrilla style, and it came out great. And I remember hearing an interview. I was listening to it right before we did this, where you're saying that had you guys known like where the movie was going to go, that you would have like possibly screwed it up, because that would have been like a lot of pressure on you guys. So I mean, it worked out great, and I cannot imagine this movie being different in the slightest. And it just like
I guarantee you, if we had any idea that it would even be seen by anybody, we would have screwed it all up. Like, we would have second and third and 25 thought every decision, and we would have run everything through the filter and tried to make everything be everything to everyone, and we would have screwed the whole movie up. I think part of what made it freeing for all of us was that there really wasn't very much money on the line, and and I was one of the people getting paid to work on it, but I think they were paying me $350 a week, and it was just, it was kind of like, hey, let's try this. So and the environment that Ed, Dan, and Greg all kind of made was kind of encouraging that. Like, let's steer into, let's just try this out, and if we fuck everything up, then we'll better luck next time. I think if I, like the stickman, for instance, if I would have thought that was going to be, that they were going to be making bumper stickers with that on it, I probably would have put a lot more thought into it. And I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, well, and it actually led into my question. I was going to ask. So, what was the process of creating the stickman? Was it like in the script described as they find a totem, or just they find some weird shit and they told you to have at it?
So I don't just sit here with this on my desk, but I was literally talking to somebody about horror today. So I happen to have the book that sort of inspired it. I would lie and say this isn't usually on my desk, but this has been on my desk for a while. It's called Magical Alphabets by Nigel Pennick, and this is the very book that I used. In the script, as it were, there really wasn't a script. There was a treatment, a very detailed treatment. It was probably like 40-something pages long, but basically it was described that they were going to find these figures or totems. I forget exactly what it said. And Dan had, in like Adobe Illustrator or something, had come up with this design that was really cool. But it was like bundles of sticks with twine wrapped around it, and it was a complicated thing. And in our poverty, making this with no money, I was like, I don't have a warehouse or a truck or anything. I sort of feel like if they would have pushed me, I would have maybe figured out a way to do it. But it's like we needed a line, we needed to have like employees, we needed to have a crew make these things. We needed an assembly line to do it, and there was no way that we were going to have that. And I had to come up with a way that you could basically, go into the woods with virtually nothing, basically an overpriced ball of twine and a pair of scissors, and you could make as many of these as you wanted to. And so I'd gotten this book because it was research, because the letters on the words on the outside of the windows and doors inside Rustin Parr's house at the end are in a language called Transitus Fluvii, and that's like a language of witchcraft that's derived from Hebrew. Some people thought we used runes, but we didn't. But I was looking at the book here. This is page 79 of the actual book, and if you look right here at this illustration, you can sort of see where the stickman is, right? Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's built into a structure, and it's supposed to be 3 dimensions, and I 2-dimensionalized it, and it didn't. I just kind of had a flash when I looked at that page, and I actually had looked at that page, and I remember I was driving down the road, and it occurred to me how to make it, and I pulled over, and I'm a pack rat, so I might still have the notebook somewhere, but on a yellow legal pad, I sketched out the stickman. Then went over to Stephanie's condo where we were all staying in Germantown, Maryland, and went into the woods and found some sticks and made one. And you can find this video. Ed was completely unimpressed with it and kind of made fun of me for it. But I feel like I did what no production designer should do, which is like I didn't get clarity. Like, oh, you don't like it? Well, let me go make 7 designs and we'll find the one you like. I just kind of stayed with that. That was the design. Like I just knew that was the design, which should have gotten me fired. But anyway, we just stayed with it. And honestly, I thought that they all hated it until I saw the Sundance poster, and it was on the Sundance poster. Until that, and so it was years later. I was not years, but like 2 years later, I was like, oh, you guys actually like this design. But that's sort of the genesis of it.
Yeah, well, and it's crazy because, like you said, it's on bumper stickers, and I mean, really, outside the close-up shot of Heather from the testimonial, and then the final shot of Mike in the corner, it's easily the most identifiable thing of the movie, and then it's the one thing that bridges the comics, the video games, the books, the sequels. That the Stickman is there, so it's very crazy, and that it's funny to hear that Ed was kind of whatever. So I mean. Why
you can find the video. Ed says something to you. I'm sitting there, and you'll see me. I'm like 25 years old or whatever, and I'm wearing a 7 Mary 3 shirt, like a maroon 7 Mary 3 shirt, because it was the 90s. And Ed says,
that looks like a bunch of sticks tied together.
And you can see in my face, I'm like, oh man, like I was sad. Like because I really believed in that design, and I think Ed might have just been fucking with me.
I like to think he was, but we'll never know.
We'll never know. We'll never know unless we ask him. Yeah, I'm not going to bother. Go on.
No. So, but why do you think like it's lingered so much that like it became so like iconic? Is just because that scene where there's dozens of them is creepy with the black and white. Like I know they said that in the commentary, like oh this is creepy, but do you think there's something else with it, or just it was one of the few things like you can't put a pile of rocks on a poster and have it translate across to the other movies?
I mean, I think that in the process of making it, they were they got Stockholm syndrome. No, I mean, I think they liked it. If they really didn't like it, he would have made me change it, or Dan would have.
What I meant with like I should have clarified with the fans in general, and like why it's become such a big aspect of the franchise, even beyond like when you guys have no longer been involved. Like in the 2016 sequel, that becomes a big part of killing the one character off. That's her totem. It kills her when they break it.
I mean, here's the thing. I can't explain why something became popular with people at all. I will say that that when I first had the idea for it, I knew that it was the right thing. Like I felt it. I don't know how else to put it. Like I just really had a strong belief that it was the right way to go. And I think that for whatever reason, you know, its creepy simplicity is its power. In that it is something you could make out of shit in the woods. If it had been a very complicated totem that looked like it was made by an art department with, you know, expertise in something, which I had none of. I don't have an expertise in making stuff like that. I think it might have, you know, it's the same reason why, like, you know, a creepy kid writing in a red crayon on the wall is always frightening. You know, there's like something about the simplicity and the primitiveness of it. And so to me, like a lot of the scares, like even the kids' handprints, which that was really Dan's idea on the wall in the house. Those things like really hit you on a primal level. So if I can theorize, which I've never really done, I would say that was it. It's just it's primal. It's simple. It's obviously a figure. You've never, to my knowledge, no one had ever made a human figure exactly that way. But when you look at it, you're like, well, it's kind of inevitable. It's just, you know, 4 pieces of friggin' sticks and some twine. It's very easy to make.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, again, that segues perfectly into my next question. So I'm leading you down the path that I want. This is great.
All right.
So I think, like you said, you know, its simplicity makes it creepy. I mean, that shot when they come into the clearing and they see it, it's like that is like genuinely disturbing to me still, even though like I know like and on the commentary they're joking like, oh, it was a laid back day, we're all, you know, making it, you know, when they made the one that Ed dubs Chewbacca, like you know, making jokes about, but it's like it's genuinely disturbing, and I think that's what makes the first movie compared to the sequels and then a lot of found footage movies in general. Why it makes it so much better is that it's simple. You don't see anything definitively, you know, supernatural that's like, oh my god, this is exact proof. You know, if like they were like, you know, hundreds of these things that you spent like $1 million on, like it wouldn't have been nearly as creepy as 20 of these.
There were a lot of them there, and actually, I will say this: the day that we were making them, or the day we were hanging them, Fahad and I were out there making them, and then at a certain point we went and got lunch, and then we came back, and we couldn't find them. And we're at the same field that we were in, and we're like walking around, and I'm like, where the fuck are these things? And I'm looking, and then I'm like, oh, there's one. And then as soon as I realized there was one, I realized they were everywhere around me. Now, I'd made them. I wasn't creeped out, but it was a weird phenomenon to be like, oh, there it is. Holy shit, they're everywhere. What the fuck? And I think that definitely lent some creepiness to it, but also it doesn't matter how laid back we were making them. It's the fact that the actors didn't know that they were going to find them. And I've said this a bunch, and I really feel like this is the thing that a lot of found footage movies miss, which is they want it both ways. They want to write a script with like snappy dialogue, and it feels like you're making a movie and all that stuff. And I mean, there's probably a way to split the difference and not make people stay in the woods for 8 days and starve them and do all the sadistic shit that we did. But But I do think that part of the strength of Blair Witch when I watch it, and this is stuff I can't take any credit for. This is all Ed, Dan, and Greg really. Is that you're watching basically a real documentary. These people are, they are creating characters, and they're acting. I wouldn't say that there isn't a performance aspect to it, but it's performance like you were doing a LARP or something. But the truth is, they don't know what they're going to walk into. They never did. They were given, Ed and Dan gave them kind of oblique notes that were that didn't tip the hand of what they were going to find. And so when they're filming something, they're seeing it for the first time. So I feel like in your bones, when you're watching footage of someone seeing something for the first time. And I think that when found footage movies try and write snappy, Aaron Sorkin sounding dialogue, it's never going to work as a found footage movie because that's just not how people talk off the cuff. And good found footage, to me, relies on finding a sense of authenticity, and that superseding anything to do with the writer taking pride in their fantastic wordsmithery, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Obviously, Book of Shadows wasn't found footage, but the 2016 one was found footage. But watching that, and I actually watched Blair Witch Project for the first time when that movie came out. So I watched both movies like back to back, and it's like, oh, like I see, like the same structure is there, but it's like, yeah, I mean, in the 2016 one, like someone will say a witty line of dialogue, and then someone like turns to the camera like they're in the office, and it's like it's a funny line, but it doesn't feel nearly as visceral as Mike making a joke, and then like that's them like actually reacting to like them laughing at. Like I always point to the scene when they're by the fire on I think it's the first night when they're doing the Gilligan's Island discussion.
They had no beer on the island, man. If they had beer, they would have had like big ass orgies.
You're kind of like the captain, and Mike's kind of like your Gilligan.
The captain was fat, though.
Well, okay, let's call it a thin captain.
Let's not call it the captain anymore, you illiterate TV people. It's the skipper. No more captain.
Oh, my.
If someone scripted that would sound stupid, but that felt real because it was real.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to script that kind of stuff. But I also think it would be really, really hard to go to a studio and ask for millions of dollars to make a movie the way we made a movie. Like, I don't know. I mean, I am not going to compare us to like the movies that always inspired me, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Night of the Living Dead, and early Cronenberg and stuff like that. Those movies that I loved, a lot of them are from the 60s and 70s and obviously a bunch from the 80s. But I think that what I love about those is like, if you gave a studio $40 million and said, make the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it would never feel as dangerous as Tobe Hooper's, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's something powerful about, you don't feel safe. And I feel like, in the Blair Witch Project, it feels like exactly what it is. There's really only one gimme that we're asking the audience to not give a shit about, which is that Heather, Mike, and Josh could have left the woods whenever they felt like it, and they also knew who was fucking with them, and that was their performance was that, and their I think that it all comes out of that. But like when we wake them up in the middle of the night, they really did get woken up in the middle of the night. We really did wait till 3 a.m. and sneak up to their tent. Like, and they were asleep and we woke them up. So they were acting like people who just woke up. They weren't acting like actors pretending to just wake up. They were human beings who just woke up. And there's a difference. Also, like, when you're dealing with like millions of dollars and stuff like that, and you're going to, like, let's say you're going to cast the Mary Brown character. The woman who played Mary Brown, Patty, she was actually the art department PA. So she was like helping me fix up the house, and she was a character. She was a very interesting person, and she had a specific crazy way that she told a story that was very engaging. And I feel like if you were to go through a casting process with a high-end casting director, like if you got Meryl Streep to play that part, she would do a wonderful job, but there wouldn't be something as idiosyncratic as what Patty gave us. And obviously Ed and Dan directed Patty and talked to her and, all that stuff. But I feel like a lot of the just happy accidents that happened because we didn't have a plan B. We didn't have a plan A, which was throw money at the problem. It was always like, okay, we're flying by the seat of our pants for the next, month. Let's figure out the best way to do all this crazy stuff we want to do. And so I feel like a lot of times those idiosyncratic decisions get filtered out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and that leads into now I want to talk about the mockumentaries for TV. The cast for all those were great. The guy who played Bill Barnes, who's like across all of them, was great.
Yeah.
Like the old timer who kind of does believe it, kind of doesn't. I'm blanking on the other older gentleman who was like the skeptic historian and all that. And then when we get into Burkittsville 7, like all the different people, like when the main guy who's like trying to like uncover this, story of Kyle Brody, like it's just like the perfect like middle-aged kind of like, sad sack, like
that guy was actually, his name's John Maynard, and we all knew him in Orlando. Like he moved to LA before I did. But he was in the first film I ever made. Yeah. And he's just John's just an amazing actor.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. He like plays very well, like the guy who it's clear being a filmmaker, isn't his active, like, he's not a director, like, he's trying his best to be in the industry, and like he's got like this obsession, and it's like a very well done performance. And then you have when you get into the scenes where you're shooting like the behind the scenes of the white enamel, when it's showing like the asylum in the 60s, like all those people are like, they could have been like over the top and all that, but it's like, each one of them, the guy complaining about Richard Nixon and Kissinger.
That guy's great. Monty Bain is his name, and he's an amazing actor, and he's been in a lot of stuff.
Because of Richard, Milhouse, Nixon, and Mr. Kissinger, I am here. They're hearing right now what I'm saying. They don't fool me. They're hearing what I'm saying. The mailman was bugging, yeah. He's just not looking at our mail. He's bugging this whole place.
So the guy who plays Kyle Brody, his name is David Grammer, and that guy is just magic. He really is magic, and he's the sweetest, warmest, most wonderful guy if you meet him and talk to him. But he was. I don't know who we would have cast if David hadn't walked in the room. I don't think there was a second choice.
Never given. Never given.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're all like just perfect for their roles. Yeah, so yeah, him as like the crazed, deranged, potentially possessed by a witch. We'll get into that, and all that. The guy who played Rustin Parr, which I actually, when I was researching this, I found out, this shows you the difference between what you guys did and then what Book of Shadows did. That guy was great as Rustin Parr, but there's a guy who is supposed to be Rustin Parr in Book of Shadows. He's the guy in the convenience store. Yeah, that guy's in My Cousin Vinny. He's the one in the courtroom where Joe Pesci's like, oh, you saw them through this dirty window. And it's like, he does a good job. It's like, I don't believe he's a serial killer. Look at the other guy. It's like, oh, that guy butchered a bunch of children and buried them in the basement.
Why did you do it, Mr. Parr?
I heard voices in my head.
Whose voice, Mr. Parr?
No idea who it was.
Was it Satan, Mr. Parr? Was it the Blair Witch, Mr. Parr?
Could have been.
Well, that guy, the original guy was like the gardener at the Haxon office or something, and I think they tried to get him to come out and be in Book of Shadows, and they couldn't find him. And to my knowledge, Matt Blasey, who has tracked down literally everybody in everybody who is on camera or did anything on Blair Witch, has talked to Matt at this point. Could not find that guy. Couldn't even find out what happened to him. Like, he may have passed away or something, but there's no obituary. There's like nothing. And
Blair Witch got him.
For real. But like even, so they're making Book of Shadows, 2 years after the Rustin Parr stuff was shot at that prison. No one could find him. I mean, he really was great though. Like he really, there's something disturbing and, in his performance. I wasn't actually there for that shoot, so I didn't meet that guy. But because that was part of Curse of the Blair Witch, and some of Curse of the Blair Witch was stuff that was actually made for the original movie, because the original movie was going to be cutting back and forth. It was going to be more of an investigative documentary, freezing the shots of Heather, Mike, and Josh and moving in and stuff. And when they put everything together, and they realized it just worked that way awesomely. So some of the stuff that had been made for Blair Witch ended up in Curse of the Blair Witch. Blair Witch, not Blair Witch. The Make a Blair Witch Foundation.
Just get stickmen, and that's what you wish on. Well, yeah, and that's great. And again, we're going into these now. You wrote on them, obviously directed Burkittsville 7, and then Shadow. I had to have it written down because they all have so goddamn similar names. I'm getting them confused. But yeah, they're all very interesting, and each one had its own different purpose. Curse and Sticks and Stones kind of just set up the general mythology of, hey, watch this before you go in, and then same with Shadow for the second one. But Burkittsville 7, I think, is the most interesting one because, technically speaking, you don't need to watch any of them to go in. They're all enjoyable movies without it. But I think the other ones kind of lead more into the plot and setting up the general mythology. But Burkittsville 7 is laser focused into this one aspect, and it's because of that's my favorite one personally of them.
It's also my favorite. I mean, I don't know. I'll always have a soft spot for Curse of the Blair Witch because that was just pure Mike Manello marketing genius right there. I was already living in LA, and they were all still in Florida when that got made. So I was writing it, and Mike was producing it back in Florida. But so to me, that was a really fun kind of seat of your pants experience. But with Burkittsville 7, what happened was the original Blair Witch was getting ready to premiere on Showtime, and Showtime wanted something like Curse of the Blair Witch. But between Artisan and Showtime, this is one of those cases, and I've had this happen. I've directed a few commercials, and sometimes this happens on this where it's like the client and the agency want something different, and you have to figure out how to split the baby and make everyone happy. In this case, Showtime wanted something like Curse of the Blair Witch. Artisan didn't want to give away anything from the sequel. Showtime didn't want a retread of Curse of the Blair Witch. They didn't want just another, hey, here's the mythology of the Blair Witch thing. Sci-Fi Channel had already done that. So they kind of came to me with that. And I got the opportunity at all. Like, they originally went back to the Haxon guys, and they were all working on their next thing at the time. But they said, hey, maybe consider Ben. And I was really excited to do it. And I went in and pitched them this idea, which to this day is one of the weirdest ideas I've ever pitched anybody, and they bought it. I still kind of can't believe it. They flew me to New York. I had to go pitch John Hageman, who was the head of marketing for Artisan. So they flew me to New York, put me up in a hotel, had a fancy pants meeting with some executives, met Amir Malin, who was the CEO of Artisan at the time, and pitched me the idea. And I remember Hageman being sort of like, yeah, why the fuck not? And my idea was, instead of let's just not talk about the movie. Let's have a central character who thinks the movie's stupid. And let's go into a piece of the mythology. And the Rustin Parr stuff, I thought, it's almost accessible because it's in the 1940s and there's film footage of it. So, like somebody who was related to someone who was involved might still be alive, in the late 90s. And let's make a documentary, and let's make a documentary where someone's contradicting the canon. And I have a kind of a bug up my ass when it comes to canon and Blair Witch anyway. Because, and this is just my opinion, obviously, like when the Blair Witch video game came out, like somebody from Lionsgate or something declared that it was canon, and I'm like, good for you. But to me, it's folklore. So if you could go back to tell the origin story, I would love to see that Ellie Kedward had nothing to do with it. She's just the name that got stuck on it. That's how folklore often works. So to me, that's a more interesting route. So I love to have an idea of somebody who would just contradict the story that we'd already told about this terrible serial killer, Rustin Parr, and how he saw an old lady ghost. What if it was the kid What if this kid talked him into doing it? What if this kid turned out to be fucking crazy years later? And in film school, the scariest film I'd ever seen, probably in my life up until that point, was a documentary called Titicut Follies, which is by a filmmaker named Frederick Wiseman, and it's made in Massachusetts in a real mental institution. I believe it was in 1962, and I showed them Titicut Follies, and I was like, I want to make something that feels like this. And they went for it. And I sort of, it's just a crazy thought that I could walk into a studio in Hollywood and say, like, you know, that 1962 documentary that I saw in film school, check this out. And that they would go along with it. But Titicut Follies was more disturbing than most horror movies because it really does have a very realistic depiction of, you know, schizophrenia. And, you know, it was a shot at a prison for the criminally insane. So it's like, you know, the people there are crazy, but then the way that they're treated by the guards and the, you know, the inhumanity on display there was even more disturbing than anything any of the inmates would have said. And I kind of like the idea of also having the grown-up version of Kyle Brody be kind of sad and sympathetic in a way, even though he's obviously, you know, not right.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And, you know, I like what you said, going to the canon briefly. The Oni comics that I may or may not do a video on one day when I get a little further away from 15 Blair Witch Project videos in a month. What I find interesting is the one, you know, is, you know, again, lore from it's a standalone comic, and it's some crazy person, you know, got possessed by the witch and wrote this stuff all down, and they go into Ellie Kedward and imply maybe there is something in the woods before, but it's like, okay, well, the guy's crazy, maybe he's making it up. And then there was another comic, I think it was the second or third issue of the Chronicles series they did, where they have the framing devices. This story is being told by multiple people around Burkittsville, and they're all like getting it a little bit different from each other. And that's the thing. It's like, I try and think of urban legends from my neck of the woods, and it's like, yeah, everyone who tells a story, it's slightly different. And I think that's what makes it especially Burkittsville 7 so cool, is because it's like, okay, we've heard this version, had, you know, he been walking around the town, and they interviewed the main guy from this instead of the older guy it's in Blair Witch Project, who have gotten a completely different story. And that's so fascinating. And again, I love, you know, like you said, he's shitting on the first the movie. There was only the one at the time. And it's, I think in my head canon is, this was made in response to the kids going missing, or the college students going missing in the woods, drumming up Blair Witch to a national level. And they're like, hey, we'll finally tell your Kyle Brody story, but you got to talk about the Blair Witch at the beginning. So it's like, this guy's like trying to get through this as quickly as fucking possible. He's like, fine, to talk about Kyle Brody. Okay, some kids went missing in the woods. It's bullshit. Okay, move on to my thing. And then you never talk about it again. And I always tell people why I like this mockumentary so much is, it's like watching a documentary about the son of Sam. Not one moment would you actually take it seriously that there was a dog telling him what to do. And, you know, not one moment in this is there the actual, we believe there was a witch who told Rustin Parr what to do, you know. And it's, you know, you can watch it from a balanced perspective of, there was no witch, this Kyle Brody kid was evil and crazy and was able to convince them, or they're both innocent victims, you know, being possessed by the Blair Witch. That it works on both levels of, this is just a true crime doc. And I actually was watching it a couple of weeks ago, and my roommate walked in on me watching it. He sat down, was watching it for a while, and like, he then, like, they said Burkittsville, and he's like, wait a minute, and like, he's Googling the names, and then he's like, oh, this is about the fucking Blair Witch, I thought this was real. He's like, nice. this is, yeah, and it's pretty damn that's a
high compliment. Well, you know, I mean, I really appreciate that. And when you talk about kind of everyone having a different story, that's something that in everything like this, and we did this on Video Palace as well, every interview, when we're doing kind of the formal sit-down interviews with characters, at the audition, and then when we're filming, same thing. We give everybody like it's like usually a two-page brief on the character, and it's, you know, sort of like a paragraph about who they are and what their background is, and then here's your story. And the story is sort of what they're there to tell you about. And I encourage them to elaborate on stuff or to add stuff from their own personal life. And then in the interviews, and they did this in Curse of the Blair Witch, and they did this in Burkittsville 7 and Shadow, and I've done it on a few other projects, where you basically cast actors who can just kind of come across like themselves and just kind of tell you their yarn, like if I was telling you the story of making the Blair Witch, right? Like if I talk to you and somebody else in the same day about it, I'm going to tell roughly the same story, but it's not going to be word for word. And based on the stuff you're picking up on, based on the mood I'm in, based on whatever. And so when we bring these people in and interview them, we treat it like a real interview, and then we edit it like a real interview. So that means you get, you're only in Burkittsville 7, somebody might only have, 3 or 5 minutes at most of screen time in the whole thing. But we interviewed them for like 30, 40 minutes. So we have a lot of stuff from which to pull. And even the way that you edit any documentary footage of someone, I feel like to our ears makes it sound authentic, because of the way when you're cutting a documentary, they call it frankenbiting, when you like pull the gaps out or rearrange something they say to make it more clear or whatever to the audience. Like, hopefully you're not doing it to change the meaning of what they're saying, but you're refining what they said using editing. And so you're doing that on these as well, and it kind of cues the audience like that's how a real one sounds. That's not I didn't script every line that every character said. I scripted what they talked about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and I think a good example, and even though I still enjoy them, is for the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead movie. They had some special features where they had one was Andy, the gun owner from the gun shop that was across the parking lot. He had a video diary, and it was good, but it felt a little scripted. He's like, "Oh, I'm burning zombies," and like it's very clear they filmed this after the fact, and like, okay, what did his character do in these scenes where we didn't have him interact, that he's got to fulfill point A, point B, point C to get to the end. And then the other was a series of fake news clips showing, the apocalypse, zombie apocalypse breaking out. And again, well made, but it felt very scripted of newsman has to say this, person who's at the White House is supposed to say this because zombies are taking over and the government doesn't know what to do. Again, imagine the government not knowing how to handle a pandemic. That'd be ridiculous.
Wait, no, that's insane. Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. And like I've done some projects that needed to look like that, but were tightly scripted because a lot of times they were vetted by an ad agency or something. And to me, it was always harder to get the authentic performance out of somebody that way. And it was always easier to get the performance that was believable if you just had them be themselves and say it. And it's not as easy as like, hey, here, say this in your own words. With stuff like Burkittsville 7 and Shadow of the Blair Witch, Video Palace, etc., it really is like it's partly in how you cast them. So you bring in actors. So bringing in Robert David Hall, who plays the filmmaker in Burkittsville 7, the guy who made White Enamel, and he blew up. He was on CSI, the original CSI, like 6 months after we made Burkittsville 7. But I thought he was a phenomenal actor to work with, and literally, so I gave him kind of the background story, and then he went and did some research on his own and read some interviews with other documentarians and kind of stole the turn of phrases that they would have. But then, when we brought him in, he came in, went through makeup, sat down, and then I just interviewed him. I mean, literally, I'm across from these people, looking them in the eye, interviewing them. And if they're giving me incorrect information that doesn't work for the story, I kind of redirect them. But for the most part, I just let them yak. For the most part, they've got the story, they got the role because they were convincing in that. And no matter how much they talk, the more they talk, the better. We did a similar project for the first Hellboy movie called the BPRD Declassified, and Joel McCrary was sort of in the kind of whistleblower role that John Maynard was in this one. And Joel, I remember going off at one point in character about why he believed in gods and demons. And it wasn't something that I'd scripted, but the interviewer, in that case, we had a real newsman named Jim Murray interviewing him. And when Jim asked him a question and he answered it completely sincerely with stuff that I had never written. And when he said it, I'm like, oh, all that's going in the show right there. That was all 100% solid gold. We're putting it all in there. And when you get it like that too, you don't have to do it 40 times. You don't have to do 20 takes to get this right. It's usually not that many takes, but you are going to roll a bunch. And in the case of Burkittsville 7, we were literally filming on 16 millimeter film. So it was expensive to do it that way. Today, we'd be shooting on an Alexa or something, and it wouldn't matter because we could just roll and roll and roll. But back then it was film to get that look. And that felt odd to me just because I'm from a world where film is such a precious commodity and you don't just let it roll. But that was how we got what we got. And, I wouldn't do it any other way, because I think to do it another way would destroy the authenticity.
Yeah, and again, it's like goes to what I said about you can watch it in both standpoints of you've seen the Blair Witch Project, it is 100% real, there was the witch that killed him, or you could watch it as, hey, Josh and Mike killed Heather, that fan theory and all that, and there is no witch and whatnot, and it's like both work, and the next question is, how did you balance that? Because I read that you said you liked planting seeds of doubt, so you aren't necessarily sure who's the victim, who's the perpetrator and all that. So how did you necessarily balance between leaving it ambiguous enough that maybe there is the Blair Witch influencing them, or maybe it's not? Because like I said, both work either way looking at it, in my opinion.
Well, I think that I'm telling, in this case, a story from the point of view of someone who doesn't believe in the Blair Witch. So the Chris Carrasco character, played by John Maynard, he's just into this serial killer. And then he has this crank theory about how this kid did the killings. And to him, it cheapens it to bring up the Blair Witch. So to tell it authentically from his point of view is not to even really get into the Blair Witch of it. It's more to just be about, like, was it Rustin Parr or was it Kyle Brody? And hanging over that is the subtext, of anyone who's at the time, everybody was experiencing Blair Witch mania. It was all over the country, so like you couldn't get away from all this mythology. Today it's a little bit more arcane, but I think that hanging over it is this thought of like, it's the Blair Witch, you idiot. Like I feel like it's like the don't go in there, you like when you're watching a horror movie, like don't open the door, don't go in there, what are you doing? And I feel like he's talking around the thing that everyone is kind of assuming is kind of hardwired into it. Which is, it's kind of I mean, I don't even know that I very consciously did anything to balance that. I think that I am a natural skeptic, but I'm also fascinated by occult stuff. And I think that's this guy. I'm just writing him the way I am. That's really the truth.
All right. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I think it's perfect. It's like a great example of balancing it, not being too, and I said it in the commentary with Ed that, a lesser movie would have been like really like over the top, like instead of the bundle of sticks that had a couple bloody teeth and hair in it, it would have been Josh's head on a pike in front of the tent that morning. And in the case of this, it would be like, there's no such thing as a witch, and then the witch appears and breaks his neck at the end of it, or like something stupid like that. And it's like, it works out. It's like I said, it fooled my roommate into thinking like, wait, are you watching like a true crime doc about this serial killer? And it, again, like you said, it's the subtext hanging over it that it's anyone who knows anything about it.
It's part of the Blair Witch mythology, and you could have probably pulled any Blair Witch story out and done something like this. It's just you wouldn't have plausibly been able to talk to even indirect witnesses to any of it, because like, the woman playing Kyle Brody's sister, at the time was probably in her 50s, and so, like if you were doing, the Robin Weaver story, anyone involved with that would be dead. So it would all be a historical reconstruction of it. And I think that there's probably a way to do it. True crime. Firstly, true crime felt like the right way to go. In addition to being a giant fan of Frederick Wiseman and Titicut Follies, I'm also and was then a giant fan of Errol Morris. And Errol Morris had done The Thin Blue Line, if you ever saw that. And The Thin Blue Line basically created enough ambiguity around a murder that it got a guy taken out of prison, like it got a guy a new trial. So I don't know. I mean, I kind of love hanging stuff on ambiguity in that way, and having a story like this where it's not provable, it's just out of our reach. We can't talk to Kyle Brody and say, did you do this? And we couldn't have talked to Kyle Brody probably after he was in his 20s to find out what he had done. But we could see that Kyle Brody was a scary person. You know, like he became a scary person, but did he become a scary person because he had encountered something horrible and evil, or, you know, all of those things are kind of at play. But from our hero's point of view, and our hero is Chris Carrasco in this case, it's like, you know, Kyle Brody was the malefactor, Rustin Parr was the simpleton. And, you know, to me, that was a fun premise to set up and then have a bunch of people kind of hate him for setting it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, and then with Kyle Brody, because, again, fascinating, and, you know, he's now become, like, a big part of the lore as well. And I believe it was Curse of the Blair Witch. They don't mention him at all. There's the picture that's used as, like, the stock photo of him, but it's implied all the kids died. Like, there was never, it wasn't mentioned that there was a survivor, and then between that and the movie is when Sticks and Stones came out, and I believe that's when it mentions, oh, well, there was Kyle Brody, he was alive. The Oni comic showed Kyle in the hospital, and then Kyle was a non-playable character, part of the story of the Rustin Parr video game. So I can't figure out the timeline exactly. Were you the one to kind of propel or kind of create the Kyle Brody character as the potential killer, or was the video game or one of these other ones come first?
I believe that I came up with the idea, but also I was the editor of Sticks and Stones, so I might have placed that idea at that time. But you know, the video game was being produced concurrently, and I had never given the thing that Kyle Brody says was something that was in the video game, although I think it might have been cut. But I was trying as best I could to make that connection. And then Dave Stern was also writing his books at the same time, and the books were Dave and I were in regular communication at that time, and Dave's an amazing writer, and so there was a lot of cross-pollination of ideas between the two.
Okay, because I wondered that, because I'm thinking okay, the video game came out this time, and they didn't really, from seeing playthroughs and all that, say he's a killer, but he's possessed by the witch in the game. So I'm like, oh wait, is that canon to this? And then they didn't get rid of the witch completely, and then that dovetails in. So you guys did a great job making it all fit in together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was in regular communication with the video game people, but I did get their script, and I think that they knew that I was doing a Kyle Brody related thing.
Then now moving on to the last one that was done. Unfortunately, I don't think they did anything for the 2016 Blair Witch. They could have brought Bill Barnes and all them back.
Yeah.
Now, I saw in an interview you mentioned that when you did Shadow of the Blair Witch, you had an original version that then a lot of it got scrapped when they went in and changed everything up when the studio.
All of it got scrapped. There was a fully written script that was pitched, and now that I've been around a lot longer, I understand why. But a lot of it had to do, I think Artisan at the time kind of felt that they could do no wrong because Blair Witch had been so successful for them that they could kind of get away with anything. And so I without taking a shit on anyone who likes Blair Witch 2, because I'm not telling anyone not to like anything, but Blair Witch was rushed into production, and I don't think that they had an adequate amount of time to develop the idea, even the idea that they were trying to do. We could argue the merits of whether that idea would have been a worthy sequel to Blair Witch, or whether it maybe would have been a better film just to kind of be its own standalone film. That would be my argument. I'm a huge fan of Joe Berlinger, so in no way am I taking a shit on Berlinger. But when Artisan saw the original cut of Blair Witch 2, they were really not happy, and they went into damage control. And one of the ripple effects of damage control was the special I was doing was like without even hey, I'm sorry that you put a lot of work into that. It was literally yeah, we're just not doing that anymore. Here, we want you to do this other idea. And they fed me the idea that they wanted me to do, which I wasn't against doing. I get it. I understand why they wanted to do it. I had a problem with the chronology of it. And I think it's because I'm kind of a purist about the way found footage is done well and documentary is done well. I have kind of a bug up my ass about authenticity when it comes to these specific mediums. And so I was like, okay, let me understand this correctly. Blair Witch Project comes out in July of 1999. Crazy guy goes crazy and a bunch of people get killed. A few months later, like let's say October. The following October, new movie comes out based on those killings. An entertainment horror movie, not like a serious docudrama even, which wouldn't happen either. But like you wouldn't crank it out that quickly. And so I had a real problem with saying that the killings were real and that here's the true story behind the real killings. But to their credit, Artisan actually was cool with some of the ideas I had, which I thought sold that idea, like having family members of the victims trying to stop the movie from being released. And I got literally zero pushback from them on that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, it was fun to make because we were emulating a kind of a Joe Berlinger, Bruce Sinofsky kind of a look and feel. That was fun to do. It was only the second thing I was ever hired to direct. I was excited to be working. I think like the rest of the Hacks and crew was before they had me do Burkittsville 7. I was sort of like, hey, I can't wait to do something that isn't related to Blair Witch. But I was also happy to be doing stuff related to Blair Witch. I've never honestly wanted out of it. It's just, as someone who wants to have a career that goes on for a while, you want to, you don't want to be so identified with only one thing. But the truth is, if you're identified at all, you've won somewhere. Like the real loss is no one identifies you with anything. And so what I would say to 30-year-old me is steer into that. But anyway, I didn't really have a hard time with their ideas. It wasn't offensive that they didn't want to do my thing. I understand that I understood I'm working for a marketing department. So, I was lucky that I got to make Burkittsville 7 for a marketing department. That's a commercial for you.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass here on this, but I thought Shadow was better than the actual movie. Like, that felt more in line with
thanks.
Blair Witch Project than the sequel. And I don't hate the sequel, but I said on my Q&A with Ed when we were talking about it briefly that it is the weirdest sequel ever, because the only sequel I can think of that is similar to it is Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, doing the deconstruction of what is the Blair Witch and what's it like to be a fan. But it's like, that was like movie number 7, like 10 years after when it became a parody, not the thing you rush into production 48 hours.
Yeah, they'd already kind of run the Nightmare on Elm Street movies into the ground and then below the ground and through the mantle of the earth, and then they did that. And then it was Wes Craven coming back, and you go, okay, well the master's back, and you let him do his thing.
Yeah, it just felt like a very weird, and I know some of the stuff like The Secret of S. Rever and some of the deeper stuff that
is actually really cool. I think.
Yeah, and a lot of it was the studio fucking with Berlinger. I know he had to shoot like the scene of them killing the campers in like his backyard like a month before like the premiere and all that. Like it was just a weird.
I mean, that kind of thing happens though. I mean, I can tell you, having seen the original cut of the movie, that it was better. I'm not going to say I don't hate Blair Witch 2, and I wanted it to succeed. But I don't especially love it, and I think that the script feels like an early draft. The dialogue feels early drafty. It's a little on the nose. It's a little hammy. But actually, like, the cast is great. It's got an amazing cast. It was the cinematography, I think, is really great. Like there are things to recommend the movie, and Joe Berlinger, I think, is just one of our greatest living documentarians. And so, it bums me out to not love everything he did. I do think it's a banana pants weird idea for a sequel. Maybe it would have worked. I don't know. I mean, the original movie wasn't not banana pants. Like, the original movie was a crazy idea. Maybe they were trying to make a sequel to a crazy idea with a crazy idea. I don't know. I mean, I know that it was financially minded. I know that what they wanted was the gore and tits version of Blair Witch, and Blair Witch isn't a gore and tits kind of a movie. So I
mean, you do see Mike's nipple at one point, so that
you do, yeah. That's true. That is true. Mike provides our only tit.
This is the first time we're seeing Mike's chest. It's really hard to pick up on video, actually.
But no, but you know, I feel like it was trying to sell something that wasn't Blair Witch. I also think that Joe Berlinger didn't like the first one, and which is totally. I'm not telling anyone what to like and what not to like, but I think that if you don't like the first one and you're making a sequel, that's going to be a challenge because you're not going to steer into the instincts of the first one. But at the same time, also as a someone who's, you know, tried to have some kind of a career in this business, I understand that a lot of times you're given a situation where you're like, oh, that's terrible. I don't have enough time to do that right, and blah blah blah. And the devil appears on your shoulder and goes, "You'll make it work." And then you're like, "Everyone, full speed ahead. We're charging into this terrible idea." And sometimes those ideas work, so, when they work, you go, well, okay, so we were flying by the seat of our pants and it actually worked. This is a case where I don't think it worked as a movie as well as it could have. And I don't think it worked for audiences. And there is kind of this hue and cry among some people for like, we want to see the Berlinger cut. I don't know. I mean, like, I think you would just have to give all the raw footage to Joe Berlinger and let him try and cut a movie out of it again. Maybe he would find something in it, but I don't think the early cut I saw was not that great. But it's all subjective. I think that the best choice that they could have made would have been what Ed and Dan wanted to do, which was to do sort of the origin story. It would have been a lot like The Witch. Yeah. And when I saw The Witch, I was like, yep, it could have worked. Now, I may be flattering all of us to think that any one of us could have made a movie as awesome as The Witch. I think The Witch is, one of the finest horror movies of the last 20 years.
I agree, yeah.
But it would have been like that kind of look, that kind of feel, the way you would have done that in 2000, 2001. But also Ed and Dan wanted to go make another movie before they came back to it. And I think at the time, Artisan was trying to do an IPO. And I think they were like, well, we can make, $100 million this year, or we can wait 2 years. I'd rather make it this year. So they rolled the dice.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the main thing is, no matter what idea, now I know, that idea of that they pitched, I know like the true hardcore Blair Witch fans would have liked or loved and all that. And I personally would love to see it, come to fruition one day. I don't care how long I need to wait. If you guys are in your 70s making it, damn it, do it. You'll be out there in the woods.
Are you sure you want to wait till you're in your 40s? Anyway, I'm sorry.
If I have to, I have to. But I think, it's also part of like the rebel nature of this movie, or the original movie, was no matter what happened, I don't foresee any scenario where the Blair Witch Project turned into a franchise like Amityville Horror, where they're on movie number like 40 now. It's a direct-to-video every year. I mean, the only thing I think because if you did that movie like The Witch, I think you would have gotten less people be like, oh, nothing's happening, and this isn't like a true horror movie. But then people would be confused. It's like, well, this is nothing like the original one. Well, and then if you did just a shoddy remake of going into the woods again, like, okay, oh, this is too much like the original. I think this movie was so unique, came in at the right time, was just so instrumental in giving a jolt to the horror industry at the time that it was lightning in a bottle. Who knows? Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe this is why I'll never be a successful producer or anything like that. But I think it's just like the first one, and all the mockumentaries around it are this perfect concoction of horror that works great. And I don't know if we saw like the backlash that came out immediately with it, and I think very unfair bashing of it, that I think that part of that would have been inevitable no matter what they did. I mean, they did like you said, a banana pants crazy sequel, like, let's do the furthest thing away from the original one we could. Yeah. And then when they did, hey, let's just do a traditional sequel, albeit almost 20 years later, that movie did just as well, not very well. It made its money back, but didn't do the impact that the first one did.
Well, I think it's hard to surprise somebody the same way, like it's hard to be surprising in the same way more than one time, which is why I actually think it was smart of them to abandon found footage for the sequel. Although, it could be argued now, I mean, hindsight is 2020, but the Paranormal Activities managed to stay in the found footage world and really work it for a long time, and probably more than anyone else ever has. And some of those movies were really great. I loved the first one, and I really, really loved the second one. I was surprised at how much I loved the second one, because I went to see it thinking I was going to hate it, and I loved it. But, I do think it's in defense of the backlash against Blair Witch, it wasn't a movie that was made with a giant audience in mind, but it became kind of a water cooler thing. And so I think people felt like they had to see it so they could be up on culture. And a lot of those people didn't like it. And then when they cranked out the sequel as fast as they did, so the first one was in theaters in July of 99. The sequel was in theaters in October of 2000. And they didn't start making that movie until like January or February, writing it. So, so they wrote it in a month or two, maybe max. And then they filmed it very quickly, and it was before you know it, it was in theaters. And sometimes that shit works, supposedly Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was written over a weekend. Could happen. But it was written by Frank Darabont, so that you got that going for you. I just think that, when the sequel came out, I think that among the people who went to see the original and didn't like it, they weren't going to go see a sequel. Among the people who went to see it, the original, and liked it, they knew enough about it to know that it was like a handcrafted product made by these, made by Ed and Dan, with love and care and hard work. And you can't do that quickly. I think that the sequel was cranked out so fast and felt like a cynical. It felt like what it was. It was a cash grab, and I think that audiences just didn't respond to that. But hey, look, you're allowed to hate whatever you want to hate and like whatever you want to like. Honestly, if you're doing good work, some people are going to hate it. That's just everything that you love passionately with your heart. There's some people who despise it. So.
Yeah, I've gotten a few downvotes on my Blair Witch video, so screw you, people. But no, and again, it's just, who knows, maybe you could say any little variable would have changed with this, that, or the other thing. Maybe then we would have had, like Paranormal Activity, had, a bunch of different sequels. The franchise would, it's still going. When you look at the Hunt a Killer that just came out, they had the Blair Witch references in Ed's last episode of Supernatural. He had the video game 2 years ago, and the movie Man Wingard from like 5 years ago now. Yeah. The movie is the franchise is still abound, not nearly to the.
They're developing a TV series. Like, I don't know if it'll happen, but there's a TV series. The thing is that the name Blair Witch is a known name, and I think if you have something that is a known name, then that's enough of a property for someone to roll the dice. I'm assuming with the 2016 movie, we've probably seen the last theatrical feature for a minute, and maybe that's okay. I don't know. I kind of think of myself as the first mega fan of it, in that, when, or maybe not even the first, but one of the first, when Greg Hale told me the idea in his place in downtown Orlando, I bought every second of it, and I was eating out of his hand. I was like, let me do something on this. Like, I just love this idea. And it just clicked in so many ways for me. And then later, after it got made, I saw it having that same effect on audiences, and that's it. I think that the same reason it worked for audiences is why the idea worked for me. And that's, Ed and Dan's genius in coming up with it. And Greg's too. Again, I think Greg Hale doesn't get enough credit.
He does now, because we said it here.
Because of me.
Yeah. I'll just put that. That'll be on the poster.
Well, I think Greg Hale and Mike Manello are both kind of unsung heroes of this. And they, Mike didn't work on the actual shoot, but he had a few crazy ideas, like what if we set up a website for this thing? Little things that maybe ended up being beneficial down the line.
Potentially. Yeah. Well, that's the thing with this. It's amazing. Like, I read a statistic, supposedly like half of Americans who were like, interviewed about it, thought it was real. And,
well, that was the thing. I remember talking to people who were pissed off that it was fake. And I'm like, so you wish that these people were actually dead? That's not right. I would get into arguments with people about it too, who would swear that it was based on folklore, and I'm like, I made it up. I made the part you're talking about. I made that shit up. I named Ellie Kedward. You never heard that name before I named her. That's because I came up with that name. You know, I made it all up.
Yeah, well, I think that was the genius part, because it's like, then, okay, so fine, okay, the actors are alive and all that, but for like a while, you guys were keeping up the whole facade of, okay, well, we made that part, but, the witch is real, going back to the Oni comic, I'll make that video one day, but, it has the framing devices of people, the one comic of like the brothers being pissed off that no one's believing their story. It's like, yeah, you goddamn Hollywood producers, no one's gonna believe us now. And then, hey, we found this manuscript, whatever, now because people like the movie, now we can actually publish this. And even on like the commentary, they're not completely giving up the goat, so to speak, of like, okay, no, 100% of this is fake. And it's a testament that even when people found out that Heather, Josh, and Mike were alive and well, that's like, okay, well, there was really a resting part. Kyle Brody was a tragic figure, potentially, who, died in a mental asylum. There's a kid who was drowned. There, bunch of dead kids.
I do think that it's like, I think that in this day and age, you could never get away with any of that, because Reddit would figure you out in about 5 minutes and expose everything that was bullshit about your story. Like,
yeah, I mean, all you had to do is like, hey, r/Burkittsville, do you guys have witches out there? No.
Boom, done. Yeah, but I do think, though, I mean, like, it worked in that way, in that kind of War of the Worlds kind of, it's not really a hoax, but we're not saying it's not a hoax, and we're letting you believe it's a hoax for a minute, or we're letting you believe it's real for a minute. But I think that, like Paranormal Activity, I think is another good example where it's like, no one thought that was real, but people dug it because it was made in a way that helped you suspend your disbelief. And, I think that, I think you can do that. I mean, that was what we tried to do with Video Palace too. It's like nobody, I don't think anyone thinks Video Palace, that there's any truth to it, but we just want to tell a story in a language that makes it easier for you to suspend your disbelief and go along with it and think, well, if I was in that situation, that's how I'd act. To me, one of my pet peeves in movies in general is when people do stupid stuff so that the movie plot can work, because the writer has a plot that they love, or the studio or whoever is married to the plot. So you have to have people do dumb shit so that it'll work. And to me, the challenge is always, how do you have characters do the smartest thing that person would do in that circumstance, which is not always easy because sometimes the smart thing is, fuck y'all, I'm out of here. And, to me, that's the challenge, and that's what makes something like that more fun. And that's also what I'm less in love with Blair Witch 2 about, is that I don't feel like all of those characters are doing the smartest thing that those people would do in that circumstance. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, and that's when I'm watching it, like, they get out of the woods, the writer couple has the miscarriage, and now they're just going to hang out for a while with this guy who they just met and smoked pot with and had a weird moment. It's like, why, like, you guys are supposed to be smart. Okay, maybe Kim, director, and then I'm blanking on the other one's name, who was a Wiccan. Like, okay, you guys are kind of weird outcasts. It's like, no, you're supposed to... There we go. Like, you guys are supposedly the intellectuals. Like, why the hell are you sticking around and all that? But yeah, I mean, people criticize, like, oh, why would they keep filming? It makes sense, though, in this facet that's like, Heather's a documentarian or wannabe documentarian.
But I think they do explain it in the movie why they keep filming, Yeah.
Like, it feels natural.
And Josh has that one scene about how it's fun looking through the viewfinder because everything doesn't feel real anymore. And I actually feel like that's one of the more poignant moments, and it's just Josh, improvising, doing what he does so well. But it makes you, to me, that answers that question, because I feel like there are found footage movies like, for instance, Quarantine, which is based on a Spanish movie called Wreck. And in both cases, it's a news cameraman who's filming what's going on. And so you kind of accept that he would keep filming when crazy shit started happening because he's a news cameraman. I don't know if it was an Ed and Dan idea or if it was just a Josh improv idea, but having that line in there, to me, it makes you go, okay, like, if you're a person who's having a hard time with reality, I can tell you from personal experience, if I'm operating a camera at an event or something, it doesn't really feel like I'm there. It feels like I'm watching it on TV, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it works out great, and again, you can nitpick any of these things. So it's like you said with when you're doing the interviews, if someone flubs a line, like I know in what I think it's Curse, Bill Barnes says, "Oh, all 7 of those kids were boys," and you could be like, "Ah, that's a mistake," and it's like, okay, whatever, it's just an old guy who, in my head canon with that, obviously he's never been like really interviewed except when these kids went missing and all that, so he's like, I'm not good on camera, I'm gonna fuck up talking about something, or in this case, it's pretentious filmmaker students who are like, oh, I'm filming something, and then you add the layer of, oh, now I feel a little insulated from this as I'm starting to get like afraid. Now you add that layer, and it feels realistic on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you decide to make something that's found footage, is that you're trying to create a sense of reality. And so, if you're Aaron Sorkin and you're writing something that's like all stylized dialogue, or you're David Mamet or something like that, like you can't do that and found footage. You can obviously make a stylized movie. There's nothing wrong with that, or, stylized anything, stage play or whatever. Like, style is fine, but the style you've chosen with found footage is absolute realism. And so exactly. it's always a hard balance when people want to have it both ways. I won't name the movies because I don't want to call out the ones that pissed me off, but like, when you have characters walk 50 feet away from the camera and they're not mic'd and you can still hear them talking, I'm like, or when there's non-diegetic score going on underneath, I'm like, where's that music coming from? I understand that to some people it's just a style, it's just a look, and there were movies like Chronicle, which was done in a found footage style, and for some reason I just rolled with it. Like I was like, okay, like it's found footage, but it kind of isn't. Like it's kind of just using it as a technique, it's not serious about what it is, because you'll drive yourself crazy on stuff like that where there's multiple cameras filming something and you're like, so how did they get all this footage, and where did all the footage come from, and who compiled it and synced it up? Like, if you start thinking about the just the work that would go into it to make found footage. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like Rec and Quarantine, is that it's like, it's just one tape. It's one tape that's in the camera. The only gimme that you have to kind of roll with is like, well, the tape would probably only be a half hour, but okay, fine, whatever. They had a weird camera that, like if you can find one camera that could roll an hour and a half, then you can go with it.
Yeah, when it's like when they had to ADR the line and of Heather saying, "Oh, we have so many fucking batteries," and here it's like, okay, that's how we get away with how are they filming for 7 days in the woods, and even exactly. Then it's just like whatever, they don't have the cameras on the entire time, because I mean, you see obviously it ends up just being an hour and 20 minutes, and half like 20 minutes of that is the first day, and then they're at the hotel. So it's like, okay, they charge it up. They're not filming the entire time type thing. I can buy that, No,
you kind of, I mean, I feel like you don't have to explain everything. But yeah, I mean, like, I can tell you from personal experience that the light that was mounted on the camera, on the CP16, took a battery belt that like you had to wear all the way around your body, and after about 2 hours was dead. I don't even think you could get 2 hours. It might have been more like 40 minutes.
God, and that's like watching. I've had to watch Blair Witch Project probably like freaking 12 times between preparing with you, preparing with Ed, and then I had just watched it randomly at the beginning of October for like Halloween time. So I'm getting really sick of this goddamn movie. Never gonna watch it again. But no, I'm just like watching, like seeing like them with their big packs, and then Mike with all like the dad equipment. I'm like, oh my god, these poor bastards are. Like, I'm surprised they didn't act like that. That's what the sequel should have been: is the 3 actors chasing you guys down one by one and murdering you. Like, what did you make us do in the woods? We got a fucking fruit basket.
I'm like, hey, it wasn't my idea. Go find Ed and Dan. Here's their address.
That would have been now. I want to see that sequel. See if Heather, Josh, and Mike want to get together to do that. And actually, we can have this document that this is my idea now. So if they do it, I'm going to sue them. But if they wait another 20 years, it'd be really great then to have Heather come back as the witch because she'll be older at that point. So do like a weird time loop. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, Heather, 40 years older than she was when she made the first one.
Yeah. So, well, if they do that, I'm suing the crap out of them, and I'll have you subpoenaed to be like, he told me that idea.
I'll delete this file and pretend that I've never met you.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap it up. So, again, thank you very much for coming on, neighbor. We'll have a grill out when it's safe in 2032.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my son, who's 2 now, he'll be able to drive me over there.
So, all right, well, again, thank you for coming on. I'll
pleasure.
put the link down below for Video Palace. Check it all out, and keep on watching when I slowly work my way through everyone who's associated with this movie. I'm finding the Rusty Parr guy. I'll find him.
You're next, Manello. Anyway, I'll talk to you later.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.